Dry Creek, 1887. Noon heat pressed down like a hand. The square shimmered with dust and the slow clank of horseshoes. Smoke from the blacksmith's forge drifted low, biting the back of the throat. Naomi Hart stood barefoot on the trading post steps, wrists bound in her father's old belt. Her dress stuck to her knees. Sweat salted her lips. She could taste iron, dust, and something bitter that had no name. "Half the price of a steer," her father barked, his voice dry as gravel. "She can cook, sew, and keep her mouth shut." Laughter cracked through the crowd, hard, male, practiced. A few women looked away. The air reeked of feed and shame. Naomi tried not to look at him. Once his hands had lifted her onto a horse. Now they shoved her forward as if pushing bad luck away. A red fly buzzed near her ear. Somewhere, a windmill creaked and turned. She thought of her mother's grave, how the soil had smelled of rain and lilac the day they buried her. Nothing had smelled of rain since. "Come on, gents," her father said. "You won't find a quieter one." A coin clinked. Another. Then silence, thick, slow, waiting. From the far edge of the square came boot steps, steady, deliberate. A tall black man crossed the dust, the sun glinting off the brass buckle at his hip. His shirt was streaked with sawdust and road dirt. His eyes, when they met hers, held a kind of tired mercy. Elijah Cole, rancher from Cotton Ridge, father of 3. He stopped in front of her father without a word, set a worn leather pouch on the table. The sound of coins landing was soft but final. No bartering, no questions, just enough to end the laughter. Her father snorted. "You sure you don't want a refund clause?" Elijah's gaze didn't waver. "She won't be judged anymore." The words hung between them like the first shadow before rain. Naomi's breath caught. For a second, she almost laughed. Half disbelief, half relief. But her throat was too tight. Her father shrugged, grabbed the coins, and turned away as if closing a deal for hay. "She's yours, Cole, yours." The crowd began to scatter. Naomi stood alone in the fading noise, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. She bent to pick up her satchel. Inside, a cracked hair comb and a small daguerreotype of her mother. She held it for a moment, thumb brushing the glass. Elijah waited beside a mule-drawn wagon near the blacksmith's wall. He didn't offer a hand, didn't speak, just waited until she climbed in. The wood creaked under her weight. He handed her a tin canteen. Long ride. The water tasted of metal, but it cooled the back of her throat. She swallowed, eyes fixed on the horizon where the land folded into heat haze. The wagon lurched forward. Dust rose behind them, swallowing the square, the shouts, her father's figure shrinking to a blur. For a while there was only the rhythm of hooves and the slow sigh of wind through brittle grass. Elijah's face was calm, unreadable. His hands, dark and calloused, gripped the reins with quiet steadiness. Naomi stared at those hands, then at the road. Part of her wanted to ask why he had done it. Part of her feared the answer. She had been bought once before, in another name, for another promise that broke before the first snow. The mule snorted. The harness jingled. A scrap of her mother's ribbon slipped from her satchel, caught the sun, then vanished beneath the wheel. Naomi pressed the photo to her chest. The smell of hot iron faded, replaced by pine resin from somewhere far ahead. The wind picked up, tugging at the green scarf around her neck. She held it tighter, as if it could keep her from coming apart. Elijah spoke at last, low and rough from disuse. Road gets quiet past the ridge. Naomi nodded, not trusting her voice. The silence between them felt heavy, but not cruel, like shade after too much light. The wagon crossed a shallow creek, the wheels groaning through mud. Water splashed against Naomi's bare ankles, cold and startling. She looked at Elijah then, really looked, and found no demand in his eyes, only a kind of weary patience that unsettled her more than anger ever could. "Why me?" she asked, barely above the rattle of the wheels. Elijah didn't look away from the road. "You looked like someone who still had a heartbeat." Naomi turned toward the plains, where heat shimmered and the air trembled with distant thunder. The mule's hooves struck rhythm against stone. Somewhere beyond the ridge, clouds were gathering, thin, silver-edged, the promise of a storm that might never come. The wagon rolled on, and the first drop of rain hit her cheek, warm as a tear. The road stretched west in a shimmer of dust and heat. The wagon wheels groaned like tired bones, dragging through patches of dry grass and stone. The sun had begun to tilt, throwing long stripes of amber across the prairie. Naomi sat stiff beside Elijah, her hands locked in her lap, the green scarf still tight around her throat. Each jolt of the cart sent a tremor through her ribs, small, uninvited reminders that she was still alive. Elijah said little. The reins hung loose between his fingers, steady as if the mules knew his mind before he spoke it. His hat brim cast his face in shadow, but when the light caught, Naomi could see the scar along his jaw, the line of an old fight won or lost. It didn't matter. He moved with the slow confidence of someone who had already survived too much. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine sap. It was the first clean smell she had breathed in months. Behind them, the town of Dry Creek had already folded into dust, its noise and judgment left to rot in the heat. Ahead, the horizon looked endless, pale as bone. Naomi reached for the tin canteen he had handed her earlier. The metal was still warm from the sun. She took a sip, careful, tasting rust and silence. "Water's thin this time of year," Elijah murmured. His voice had the low rhythm of wagon wheels, deep and tired. "Ridge wells run dry by July." Naomi nodded. "How far?" "About half a day." He glanced at her briefly. "You'll see the pines before dark." She wanted to ask more, about the land, the children. What kind of man buys a woman just to give her a roof? But the words stuck in her throat. Every question she'd asked in her old life had cost her something. Better to stay quiet and count the fence posts leaning by the road, each one a grave marker for someone else's hope. The mules slowed at a rise in the land. Naomi lifted her eyes. Far ahead, the sky opened wide, and the hills took on a strange bluish glow, as if the day itself were exhaling. For the first time she heard water, not running, just the echo of it in the stones. Elijah pulled the reins, letting the animals rest. He stepped down, stretching his back. "You can walk a bit if you like. Helps the legs." She hesitated, then climbed down. The ground burned through her soles. The wind tangled her hair, whipping loose strands across her face. Elijah walked ahead, boots sinking into sand-soft soil. She followed, a few paces behind, watching the shape of him against the light. Broad shoulders, dust on his collar, the steady swing of a man who never hurried. When they reached the crest, she saw it, the first outline of Cotton Ridge. The land dipped into a valley dotted with pine and cottonwood, a river ribboning through the gold of late grass. A small house crouched at the edge of it all, walls leaning like they'd grown from the dirt itself. "That's home," Elijah said quietly. Naomi stared. The word felt heavy, foreign. Home had been sold out from under her too many times to mean anything. Still, something in her chest shifted. A pulse, small but stubborn. They walked back to the wagon. Elijah lifted a feed sack, checked the harness, then turned toward her. "You'll have your own room," he said. "Ain't fancy. Roof leaks some." "I've lived worse," she replied, almost smiling. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a second the guardedness in his eyes eased. "Didn't figure you for soft." "I'm not," she said, and he nodded once, like that was the only answer that mattered. The sun sank lower. Long shadows slid across the land. Naomi climbed back into the wagon. Elijah followed, and the mules started down the hill toward the pines. The smell of resin thickened, cool and sharp. Crickets began their steady hum. Naomi leaned back, eyes half closed, letting the wind brush the sweat from her neck. For the first time in years, she didn't flinch at the quiet. The rhythm of hooves became a heartbeat beneath the dying light. The scarf around her neck fluttered loose, catching the last streak of gold. She held it still, afraid it might blow away. As they reached the valley floor, the first fireflies rose from the grass, tiny sparks in the fading dusk. Elijah's voice broke the silence, soft but sure. "Past that bend, you'll see the lights from the barn." Naomi followed his gaze. The sky ahead glowed faintly orange, a promise or a warning, she couldn't yet tell. The wheels hit a rut. The wagon jolted. Naomi grabbed the seat, steadying herself. Behind them, thunder murmured over Dry Creek, low and distant, like an argument she was done listening to. Ahead, the land darkened. The pines waited, tall and quiet, their silhouettes shaped like watchful men. The road narrowed into shadow. Naomi breathed once, slow, and whispered to no one. "Long road, indeed." Elijah glanced sideways but didn't speak. The sound of the reins creaked, the mules pushed on, and the sky swallowed the last of the light. By the time they reached the valley, dusk had turned the pines to shadows. The wagon creaked through a narrow path lined with dry thistle and bent fence posts. The air smelled of resin and old rain, the kind that never quite came. Naomi's arms ached from holding the seat. Her eyes followed the cabin that slowly came into view, a crooked shape of wood, patched walls, smoke drifting thin from a stovepipe that leaned north. Elijah pulled the mules to a stop. "We're here." Naomi stepped down carefully. The ground was cool, the dirt soft under her bare feet. The porch sagged like an old man's back. Instead of a door, a heavy wool blanket hung from nails, fluttering with the wind. Chickens scattered from the steps. Somewhere close, water trickled faintly. A spring, maybe, or a leaking trough. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of pine pitch and bread gone stale. Her eyes adjusted slowly. The cabin was one room below and another above, stairs narrow and steep as a ladder. 4 pairs of boots sat by the wall, smallest to largest. Beside the hearth lay a carved toy horse with one wheel missing. "Children are asleep," Elijah said. He set down the lantern. Its light trembled across the walls. "You can use the room upstairs. Bed's small but clean." Naomi nodded, unsure what to say. She brushed her fingers along the table, feeling the rough grain, the tiny grooves of years. Something about the place felt unfinished, yet lived in, like a sentence waiting for its last word. Her stomach growled quietly. She hadn't eaten since morning. Elijah noticed but didn't mention it. He pointed toward the shelf above the stove. "There's beans, water buckets outside. You can heat some if you want." She hesitated. Cooking felt like trespassing, but hunger was stronger. She lit the stove, the flame snapping awake, throwing gold on the wood walls. The pot was heavy. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. When the beans boiled, she stirred too fast, and the handle slipped. The pot hit the floor with a sharp clang, scattering beans across the planks. The sound split the quiet like a whip. Naomi froze. The noise of her heartbeat filled the room. She waited for the shout, the hand, the punishment she knew by memory. But it didn't come. "Time 600 pounds. Elijah turned from the doorway, crouched beside her. He picked up the pot, set it back on the stove. "It's only beans," he said simply. The words disarmed her. She opened her mouth to apologize, but nothing came out. Elijah rinsed his hands in a basin, then nodded toward the stairs. "You can rest. I'll clean up." She looked at him confused. "It was my fault." "Still just beans." His voice stayed quiet, steady as rain before dawn. Naomi stood, the air around her trembling with something unfamiliar. Mercy, maybe, or the absence of judgment. She climbed the narrow stairs, her knees weak. The room upstairs was small. 1 bed, 1 window, a chest for clothes. Through the glass, she could see the line of trees glowing faintly in moonlight. She sat on the bed, palms pressed to her thighs, listening to the muffled movements below. The smell of beans lingered, mingled with pine smoke. Her eyes burned. She hadn't cried in weeks, but now the tears came without sound, spilling quietly down her cheeks. She lay back, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the boards like constellations. Outside, a whip-poor-will called, lonely and precise. For the first time in a long while, The dark didn't feel like a cage. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked. Elijah's voice murmured something soft, maybe to himself, maybe to the night. Naomi couldn't catch the words, only the tone. Worn, patient, unbroken. A faint cough drifted from the other room, small and childlike. Naomi sat up, listening. Another cough followed, sharper this time. Then a tiny voice, restless and fevered. She rose, heart quickening. Her feet found the steps. The air smelled of damp wood and smoke as she moved toward the sound. Elijah stood by the hearth, lantern in hand, eyes lifted toward the upstairs door. He didn't speak, only met her gaze. A question, a plea, both quiet as breath. The child coughed again. Naomi stepped forward without thinking. The blanket that served as a door swayed behind her, letting in a gust of cool night air. The wind had shifted by midnight. Rain brushed the roof in short, uneven breaths. Naomi moved through the dark, guided by the lantern Elijah held. The floor creaked under their steps. In the corner room, little Ruth lay twisted in the sheets, cheeks flushed red, her small chest rising too fast. Naomi knelt beside the bed. "How long?" "Started coughing at dusk," Elijah said, voice tight. "Fever came quick." Naomi touched the girl's forehead. It burned. The sight made her stomach twist. "Boil water," she said. He didn't question, only moved to the stove. The room filled with sounds of hurried motion, the scrape of the kettle, the crackle of wood catching flame, the soft whimper of a sick child. Naomi found a rag, dipped it in the rising steam, and laid it across Ruth's brow. The scent of pine and smoke mixed with the sour edge of sickness. "Willow bark," she murmured, remembering. She dug through her satchel until she found a small pouch of dried herbs, the same ones her mother once used. Her hands shook as she crushed them, breathing in their bitter comfort. Elijah watched from the doorway. "You done this before?" Naomi didn't look up. "Too many times." The memory came quick. A candle-lit room. Another small face burning under her touch. Her sister's child, maybe. She couldn't remember anymore. Only the silence that followed. She blinked hard, driving the image back. Ruth stirred, moaning. Naomi wrung the cloth again, pressed it gently to the girl's neck. "Hush now," she whispered, voice trembling. "You'll be all right." The fever lasted through the night. Elijah paced like a caged bear, his boots thudding on the floor. Every time Ruth cried out, his hands twitched, useless against what he couldn't fight. Naomi worked quietly, changing rags, feeding spoonfuls of cooled tea, murmuring nonsense words that somehow held the room together. Hours stretched thin. The rain stopped. Wind pushed at the blanket door, carrying in the smell of wet earth. The lantern's flame dimmed to a heartbeat. Then, as dawn's gray light began to creep across the floorboards, Ruth's breathing eased. The tight rattle in her chest softened into slow sighs. Naomi exhaled for the first time in hours, her shoulders collapsing. Elijah crouched beside her. "She's better?" Naomi nodded, too tired to speak. Her fingers brushed the child's hair, still damp with sweat. "Sleep now," she whispered to both of them. Elijah rose, poured what little water was left into a cup. "You need rest. I'll stay till she wakes." He hesitated, then left the room. Naomi sank back into the chair by the bed. Her hands smelled of bark and fever. The silence was almost holy. When morning light reached the windows, Naomi finally closed her eyes. She drifted half asleep until a sound stirred her, a faint clink on wood. On the table by the bed sat a clean tin mug, steam curling from it, and beside it a small folded scrap of paper. The handwriting was rough, uneven. "Thank you." She stared at the words until they blurred. Her chest tightened, an ache she didn't know how to name. She lifted the mug. The tea inside smelled sharp, unfamiliar, maybe pine needles steeped in rainwater, but it warmed her throat. Outside, a rooster crowed. The world was beginning again, indifferent, yet somehow gentler. Naomi leaned her head against the bed frame, watching Ruth's calm face. A strand of hair had fallen across the girl's nose. Naomi brushed it back, careful not to wake her. Downstairs, Elijah moved quietly. The sound of his boots on the floor was no longer heavy. It had rhythm now, the steady pace of someone who'd decided to stay within reach. Naomi looked at the paper again. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The words were plain, awkward, and sincere, something built not from habit, but from effort. It was more than gratitude. It was trust. She folded the note, slipped it into the pocket of her dress. Through the window, thin sunlight spread over the field behind the cabin, touching the fence, the trees, the roof patched with old hides. For a moment, Naomi let herself believe that maybe a place could heal, the way a wound closed if you stopped tearing it open. Ruth shifted in her sleep, mumbling something Naomi couldn't catch. She smiled faintly, smoothing the blanket. "You're safe now," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but no one noticed. When Elijah appeared at the door again, his face was unreadable, yet softer around the eyes. "Coffee's ready," he said. Naomi nodded. "I'll come in a bit." He lingered as if to say more, then left. The lantern sputtered once, catching a last spark before dying out. Naomi sat still, hands folded in her lap, the weight of the small paper grounding her to the chair. Outside, the clouds broke apart, streaks of light cutting through. The wind shifted again, lifting the blanket door, carrying a breath of cool morning air through the room. Naomi turned toward it, eyes half closed. Somewhere in that wind, the house seemed to exhale too, as if learning to breathe beside her. And just beyond the doorway, Micah's small shadow flickered across the stairs, pausing, watching her with wide eyes before vanishing back into the quiet. The air turned mild in the weeks that followed, soft enough that the windows stayed open from dawn till dusk. Dust still clung to the floorboards, but the smell of sickness had faded, replaced by bread, soap, and the faint sweetness of wood smoke. Naomi swept the porch every morning, her sleeves rolled up, the hem of her skirt dark with ash. When she looked out toward the pasture, she could see Elijah splitting wood near the fence, his axe flashing in steady rhythm. It sounded like a heartbeat the house had learned to keep. The children came slower. First Ruth, holding the hem of Naomi's skirt, then Micah, silent and watchful, and finally Isaiah, the oldest, hovering between suspicion and curiosity. They didn't ask her to stay. They just started leaving their shoes near hers by the door. One morning, Naomi found a piece of charcoal beside the stove and an old plank near the wall. She carried them outside to the porch, set them across her knees, and drew a crooked line. "That's an A," she said, glancing at Ruth. "Like apple." Ruth frowned. "We don't have apples." Naomi smiled faintly. "Then A for air." She traced the letter again, slower this time. Isaiah watched from the step, arms crossed, his mouth twitching like he wanted to speak but didn't. After a while, he picked up the charcoal. "Then this one's for barn." He tried to write a B, pressing too hard. The charcoal snapped in two. Naomi laughed softly and handed him the other half. "Close enough." For the first time, he smiled, quick, nervous, and real. The lesson grew from there. Every day for a few minutes before supper, they wrote words on scraps of wood. Cow, sun, Ruth, Micah, fire. The porch filled with small planks covered in smudges. Elijah never said much about it. But sometimes, when he came in from the field, Naomi noticed his gaze linger on those blackened letters, and the faintest pride flickered across his face. In the evenings, after the children went to bed, Naomi sat by the window mending socks. Outside, crickets droned, and fireflies blinked above the grass. The quiet had stopped feeling like emptiness. It felt instead like the breath between words. But under that peace lay a tremor she couldn't name. Sometimes, when she heard the children whispering about their mother, what she had sung, how she had braided Ruth's hair, Naomi's chest tightened. She would turn away, hiding the sting in her eyes. She didn't want to take another woman's place, only to give these children something steady to reach for. Yet every time Ruth leaned her head on Naomi's arm, or Isaiah brought her a splintered toy to fix, a part of her that had long been frozen began to thaw. That afternoon, the light turned gold and low. Naomi sat with Micah on the porch, tracing letters with his small finger. The boy's hand was warm, his voice barely above the hum of cicadas. "That's my name?" "Yes," she said, smiling. "It means—" He interrupted softly. "Mama used to say it means who is like God." Naomi swallowed. She was right. The silence stretched. A cloud passed over the sun, and the air cooled suddenly. Micah's eyelids fluttered. "Can I nap here?" "Of course." She smoothed his hair. The child's breathing evened, slow and shallow. Naomi leaned back against the post, the boards warm beneath her palms. The smell of pine and sun-dried laundry hung in the air. She must have dozed, too, because the next thing she felt was a small tug on her sleeve. Micah's lips moved, words caught between sleep and dream. "Mama." The sound was soft as breath, fragile as a moth's wing. Naomi froze. For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it. But the boy stirred again, whispering the same word, clearer this time, before jerking awake. His eyes widened, startled by what he'd said. I didn't mean... He sat up, cheeks red, glancing toward the door. Naomi's throat ached. She reached out, touched his shoulder. It's all right. He stared at her hand, then at her face, unsure. The wind lifted the edge of her scarf, brushing against his cheek. He didn't move away. Inside, a pot clattered. Elijah returning from the field. The moment broke like a thread snapping. Micah scrambled up and ran inside, leaving Naomi alone with the echo of that single word. She sat very still, eyes on the horizon where the sky darkened toward the ridge. The air smelled of something faintly sweet. Wild mint crushed under the porch steps. She didn't cry. Instead, she pressed her palm to her chest, feeling the small tremor there, as if a door had opened quietly within her. The sun dipped behind the trees. The first stars came out, thin and uncertain. Somewhere beyond the fence, a coyote called, long and lonely. Naomi stood, gathered the charcoal pieces, and stacked the wooden planks neatly by the wall. The last one bore Micah's name, half faded by the afternoon heat. She traced it once more with her finger, leaving a faint black mark on her skin, then whispered into the gathering dark, "It's all right." Behind her, the blanket door stirred in the wind, and Elijah's voice carried faintly through it, low and even. "Supper's ready." The sun returned with a vengeance, white and sharp. By late morning, the air over Cotton Ridge shimmered, each breath tasting of iron and dust. Elijah hitched the wagon while Naomi packed a small list of things: salt, thread, a tin of coffee. The children stood by the porch rail, watching as if she were leaving forever. Ruth clutched Naomi's sleeve until Elijah said gently, "We'll be back before dark." The road to Dry Creek felt different this time. Narrower, but not as cruel. Naomi kept her eyes on the horizon, the scarf at her neck catching the wind. Elijah's quiet filled the spaces where words might have gone. When they reached town, the sounds rushed in, horses snorting, women bargaining, a piano jangling somewhere behind the saloon. Naomi drew her shawl tighter. It had been months, but the square still smelled of sweat and judgment. They stopped at the general store. Elijah stepped inside to order supplies, leaving her near the shelves of flour and canned peaches. The air was heavy with spice and old paper. Naomi trailed her fingers along a stack of seed packets, tomato, corn, mustard greens, when a voice sliced through the noise. "Well, if it isn't the barren ghost herself." Naomi froze. The sound belonged to Agatha Hale, her former mother-in-law. She turned slowly. The woman stood in the doorway, fan flicking lazily, her eyes sharp as needles. Beside her, Abel Hale shifted awkwardly, hat in hand. A younger woman clung to his arm, pale and smug, a lace glove resting on her untouched belly. Naomi's throat went dry. "That's her?" the younger woman asked, loud enough for the clerk to hear. Pretty but cursed, they said. Agatha smiled without warmth. Couldn't give us even a pup. Naomi steadied herself against the counter. The room tilted. She saw again the night she'd been sent away. The torn dress, the slammed door. Her palms stung from ghosts of old bruises. "I will," the younger woman said, patting her stomach that held nothing. A big, healthy boy. Laughter rippled around them. Naomi's vision narrowed to the curve of her own hands, the small scar along her thumb from chopping wood. She wanted to leave, but her feet refused to move. Then a shadow fell across the light. Elijah had stepped out from behind the shelf, his frame blocking the glare. Dust clung to his sleeves, his eyes calm but unyielding. He looked at the two women as if weighing their words on an invisible scale and finding them hollow. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that everyone had to lean in. "She's the only one who can get my daughter to sleep," he said. "The only one who taught my boys their letters. The only one who makes my house feel like it has a roof." No one answered. The clerk coughed, pretending to stack tins. Even Agatha's fan slowed mid-swipe. Elijah turned toward Naomi then, his gaze softening just slightly. "Ready?" She nodded. Her knees shook, but she didn't lower her eyes. They walked out together, the sound of boots steady on the porch boards. Behind them, the whispers fell silent. Outside, the light was blinding. Naomi exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Elijah didn't speak again, just helped her onto the wagon. The reins creaked as they started moving. Halfway down the street, Naomi finally found her voice. "You didn't have to do that." "Maybe not," he said, eyes on the road. "But I wanted to." The words settled between them, heavier than any confession. The wagon rattled past the blacksmith, past the square where she'd once stood on the wooden block like an object for sale. The space was empty now. Only the dust remained, swirling in the heat, erasing footprints. Naomi watched it disappear behind them. Her hand brushed against the bench, searching for something solid. She touched Elijah's sleeve by accident, the fabric rough but warm. He didn't pull away. By the time they left the town's edge, the sky had begun to dim. Clouds gathered low, bruised purple, pressing down on the ridge. Naomi closed her eyes, the echo of laughter still faint in her ears, but its sting fading. She had survived worse sounds. The air cooled as they turned toward the trail home. Crickets had already begun their song. Naomi let her head rest against the side rail, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. When she opened her eyes again, they were near the fence line. The fields looked darker than usual. The wind moved differently, slow, circling, uncertain. She frowned, glancing toward the barn. A figure leaned against the outer fence post, half in shadow, half in moonlight. Boone Talbot, the trapper from the ridge, his shoulders swaying, a bottle glinting in his hand. Even from the distance, she could smell the sour twist of whiskey. Elijah hadn't seen him yet. Naomi's pulse quickened. Boone raised his bottle in mock greeting, grin crooked. "Well," he slurred, voice drifting through the stillness, "look what the storm blew back." Naomi's fingers tightened on the seat. Elijah slowed the mules, eyes narrowing. The air between them went still, too still, like before lightning strikes. Night fell heavy and low, the kind that swallowed sound. The air held the scent of damp soil and old pine. Naomi stepped down from the wagon, her skirt brushing the dry grass. The cabin stood ahead, lamplight flickering faintly through the blanket that hung for a door. Elijah unhitched the mules, his movements slow, careful, while thunder crawled along the distant ridge. "I'll fetch the water," Naomi said quietly. He nodded, shoulders sagging with weariness. She took the bucket, walking toward the well. The ground was slick from dew, the wind thick with the metallic taste of an oncoming storm. Somewhere behind her, a door hinge groaned. She had almost reached the fence when a voice came out of the dark. "Evenin', pretty thing." The bucket slipped from her hand, clattering against stone. Boone Talbot stepped from the shadow of the oak tree, a bottle dangling from his fingers. His breath carried the sour heat of whiskey. "Didn't mean to scare you." Naomi stiffened. "You should head home, Boone." He chuckled. "Home's too quiet. Thought I'd come see what Cole's been hiding out here." His eyes roamed over her in the lantern glow. "Heard tell you're the one he bought at the market." Naomi's throat tightened. "You're drunk." "Drunk enough to ask what every man's been wondering." He took a step closer, the grin twisting. "Does he know what he paid for?" She moved back, hand brushing the fence rail. The wind picked up, sweeping dust around them. "Go," she said, her voice low but firm. Boone's laugh was a rasp. "Or what? You'll pray me away?" His hand shot out, catching her wrist. His skin was rough, fingers digging into bone. She jerked, but he held fast, the bottle swinging loosely from his other hand. "Come on now, just a smile." Before she could scream, the sound of boots pounded through the dark. Elijah hit Boone like a storm breaking over dry land. One punch, quick and clean, split the silence. The bottle flew, shattering against the fence. Boone staggered, cursed, swung back, missed. Elijah's second blow sent him sprawling into the dirt. For a moment, all that moved was the lantern flame flickering wildly in Naomi's hand. Boone groaned, tried to rise, but Elijah stood over him, chest heaving, blood glinting across his knuckles. "You're done," he said, voice shaking. Not from fear, but fury kept on a leash. Boone spat dirt, eyes glassy. "You think you own her?" Elijah's jaw tightened. "No," he said, "but no one touches her." The wind swallowed the rest. Boone crawled backward, then stumbled to his feet and limped toward the ridge, disappearing into the black. The night closed behind him. Elijah turned then, breathing hard. The cut across his hand gleamed dark. Naomi stood still, her heart slamming against her ribs. He took one step toward her, then stopped, as if afraid to come closer. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her hands trembled. Her wrist throbbed where Boone had grabbed her, a red mark rising on the skin. Elijah saw it, his face tightening. He pulled the red kerchief from around his neck, dusty, frayed at the edges, and reached out. "Let me." Naomi hesitated, then held her hand out. His touch was gentle, the fabric warm from his throat. He wrapped it slowly, the movement careful, deliberate. "No one touches you," he said again, softer this time. "Not unless you want them to." The words hit something deep in her, older than pain. She looked at his hand, the blood still fresh, the trembling he tried to hide. "You're bleeding," she whispered. He glanced down. "Ain't much." "Let me—" She caught herself, then tried again. "Come inside. I'll clean it." They walked back toward the cabin together, silent except for the crunch of gravel underfoot. The storm had drifted east, leaving only a faint rumble. The lantern light wavered as they stepped inside. Naomi fetched a bowl of water, tore a strip from an old muslin cloth. Elijah sat at the table, his shoulders hunched, hand resting palm up. She dabbed at the cut, careful not to meet his eyes. The air between them was thick with what hadn't been said. "You didn't have to," she murmured. He looked at her then, steady, calm again. He should have known better. Her hand lingered on his. "You don't even like fighting." "I like less seeing someone hurt you." The words landed like a stone in still water. Naomi blinked, breath catching. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to glow with quiet heat, the kind that didn't burn, only stayed. Outside, an owl called once, sharp and lonely. Naomi wrapped his hand, tied the knot, and sat back. He flexed his fingers, testing. "Thank you," she said. Elijah shook his head. "Don't thank me for being decent." But she did, silently, with her eyes. He rose, turned toward the door. "Best rest. Long day tomorrow." When he was gone, Naomi sat alone for a while, the red kerchief still warm against her wrist. Through the open window, the stars hung low, trembling with wind. Then, from outside, a sharp cry, high, young, and terrified, cut through the quiet. The scream came sharp, cutting through the night like a blade. Naomi dropped the cloth, her heart jerking upward. Elijah was already moving, pushing through the blanket door, boots pounding against the porch. The lantern swung in his hand, throwing wild shadows across the yard. "Isaiah!" he shouted. Naomi followed the sound to the woodpile behind the barn. The moon hung pale and cold above the ridge, washing everything in silver. Isaiah knelt in the dirt, his small hands clutching his leg. The axe lay nearby, its edge dark and wet. "Oh God," Naomi whispered. She fell to her knees beside him. Blood soaked through the boy's pant leg, pooling fast. "Don't move," she said, voice trembling. "Don't move, sweetheart." Elijah knelt on the other side, jaw tight. "He tried to split wood after dark," he said, half to himself. "Told him not to." "Go get water," Naomi interrupted. "Clean rags, whatever's near." He ran. She pressed her palm against the wound. The heat of the blood startled her. It was alive, fierce. Isaiah's face was white, his lips trembling. "It's all right," she whispered, not believing it but saying it anyway. It's all right, baby. When Elijah returned, she tore the rags into strips, dipped one in water, and began to clean the gash. The smell of iron filled the air. The boy cried out once, then bit it back, tears cutting clean lines down his dusty cheeks. Naomi's hands shook but didn't stop. She'd done this before, too many times on people who hadn't lived. But tonight she refused to let death even look their way. Elijah held his son's shoulders steady. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're fine, son. You hear me? You're fine." His voice cracked halfway through, but he didn't stop. Naomi wrapped the wound tight, layer after layer, until the bleeding slowed. Her dress was streaked with red, the kind that never washed out. When she tied the final knot, her breath came shallow. The night was so quiet she could hear her own pulse in her ears. Isaiah sagged against Elijah's chest, shivering. "It hurts," he said weakly. I know." Naomi brushed his hair from his forehead. "But you're safe now. You're safe." The boy's eyes fluttered. "Don't cry," he mumbled, voice breaking. "Don't cry, Mama." The word hit Naomi like a shot. She froze, hands still pressed against the bandage. For a second, she thought he'd mistaken her for someone else, but his eyes, half closed, unfocused, were turned to her. "Mama," he said again, barely a breath this time. Naomi felt something inside her crack open, not in pain, but in release. The world seemed to still around that word. Elijah looked at her over the boy's shoulder, and in his eyes she saw not surprise, not confusion, just quiet understanding. "Rest, Isaiah," Elijah whispered. "You're all right." They carried him inside, laying him on the kitchen table. The lantern light trembled, catching every streak of blood on the wood. Naomi cleaned what she could, her fingers raw, her mind caught between fear and awe. The boy slept, his breathing even but shallow. Ruth and Micah hovered near the doorway, eyes wide, silent as stones. Naomi managed a small smile for them. "He'll be fine," she said, though her throat burned from the lie's edge. "He's strong." Elijah fetched a quilt, spreading it over the boy. "He'll need to stay off that leg for a while." Naomi nodded. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She turned toward the basin, washed the blood from her fingers. The water turned red, then pink, then clear again. When she looked up, Elijah was watching her. "You did good," he said quietly. She tried to speak but couldn't. Her mouth opened, then closed. He took a slow step closer, the light brushing over the cut still raw on his knuckles. "You saved him," he said. Naomi's chest tightened. "No," she whispered. "He saved me." Elijah frowned slightly, not understanding. Naomi glanced at the boy sleeping under the quilt, his lips parted, one hand still clutching the edge of her skirt. "He called me Mama," she said, almost to herself. The word lingered in the air like the last note of a hymn. Elijah didn't answer. He just looked at her, something soft unraveling in his eyes. Then he reached out, touched her shoulder lightly. Nothing more than the weight of a promise. She covered his hand with hers, holding it there. The silence that followed was heavy but full, the kind that carried more than words could hold. Outside, the wind rose again, brushing through the cottonwoods. The smell of rain returned, faint but real this time. Naomi leaned against the table, exhaustion sinking deep into her bones. The house was quiet except for the steady breathing of the boy, alive and sleeping. She let her eyes close for a moment, her fingers still wrapped around Elijah's. When she opened them, she saw movement by the window. The first drop of rain sliding down the glass, followed by another, then another, each one glinting gold in the lantern light. Dawn came gray and damp, the kind that carried no warmth. The house was still, save for the soft hiss of the stove and the faint rustle of the quilt when Isaiah stirred. Naomi sat beside him until his breathing evened, then slipped quietly to the porch. The boards were cool under her feet. Mist drifted through the trees, curling like ghosts of unspoken things. Elijah was already outside, standing by the fence with a cup of coffee gone cold. His shoulders looked heavier in the morning light. When Naomi approached, he didn't turn right away. Only when the gate creaked did he glance over. "He slept," she said. He nodded. "Strong boy." His voice was rough from the night before. "Takes after his mama." Naomi hesitated, unsure how to answer. She leaned against the post beside him, the smell of damp earth filling the space between them. For a while they said nothing, listening to the wind shift through the pine needles. "Elijah," she began, voice low. "Can I tell you something?" He took a sip from the cup, then set it down on the rail. "You can tell me anything." Naomi's fingers twisted in her skirt. "I wasn't always like this." She searched for words that didn't sound broken. Before the market, before Abel, there was another time. He waited, eyes steady, patient. "I was 19, she said. "There was a flood that spring. The river took half our horses." Her voice trembled. "One got stuck in the mud near the ridge. I went down after it." She stopped, swallowed hard. "I pulled it free, but I fell. The fever came after. The doctor said I'd never—" her voice thinned. "Never carry a child." Elijah's jaw tightened, not with judgment, but with quiet anger at the world itself. "You tried to save something," he said, "and it cost you." Naomi nodded. "And no one ever let me forget it. Not my husband, not his mother, not even my own father." She looked out toward the field, the soil still scarred where the rain had passed. "Sometimes I still believe them." The wind rose, carrying the smell of wet grass. Elijah picked up a small stick, turned it in his fingers, then threw it into the mud. "You ever think maybe they were wrong?" Naomi let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, but wasn't. "Wrong?" He faced her fully now. "You kept Ruth alive through fever. You pulled Isaiah back from bleeding out. You hold Micah when he wakes crying. He paused, voice steady. You make a home out of dust. I reckon there's more than one way to bring life into this world. The words hit her harder than she expected. She blinked, the sting behind her eyes sharp and clean. You don't have to say that. I know, he said. I mean it anyway. Silence settled again, but softer this time. Naomi looked down at her hands, hands that had done so much, failed so often, yet still trembled when touched with kindness. She turned them over, palms rough, lines darkened by work. You think people like us ever get forgiven? She asked. Elijah's gaze drifted to the horizon. I don't think the good Lord keeps count the way folks do. He picked up his cup again, the steam long gone. He just watches to see if we keep trying. Naomi smiled faintly, a small, fragile curve. Then I'll keep trying. They stood side by side, not touching, but close enough to share breath. A few rays of sunlight broke through the fog, touching the tips of the grass. Naomi felt it on her skin, light as promise. Behind them, the house creaked awake, Ruth's footsteps, Micah's sleepy hum, the ordinary sounds of morning. Naomi turned toward them, then back to Elijah. You should rest, she said. You look like you fought a storm. He huffed a quiet laugh. Maybe I did. She lingered on the porch while he went inside. The air had begun to warm, carrying the faint smell of sap and damp wood. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider standing in someone else's life. The fence, the cabin, even the uneven porch boards, they all seemed to breathe with her now. Still, something uneasy stirred at the edge of her mind. She looked up at the sky. Clouds were gathering again, darker this time, not from rain, but from heat. The wind shifted east, carrying a faint dryness. Inside, Elijah coughed, a deep, dry sound that didn't stop right away. Naomi turned, concern flickering in her chest. He waved her off when she reached for him. Just dust, he said, voice rasping. She frowned, watching him disappear into the kitchen. The sun climbed higher, hard and white. A single drop of sweat slid down her neck, and she wiped it away with the edge of her scarf. Dust, she whispered, looking at the parched hills. No, the land's burning up. The world smelled of heat and iron again. The season was turning, and something inside her knew. Storms didn't always come with rain. By midsummer, the rain had vanished, and the land turned the color of old bone. Dust hung in the air like fog. The creek behind the pasture shrank to a shallow line. Frogs gone silent. The rocks hot enough to burn bare skin. Every morning Elijah walked the fence, slower each day, his cough deepening. Naomi followed him sometimes, a jug of water in hand, her heart tightening at the sound of his breath. Inside the cabin, the air felt trapped. Curtains didn't move. The heat pressed against every wall. Ruth fanned Isaiah while Micah filled jars with the last of the well water. Naomi wrung a cloth, laid it on Elijah's neck, and felt the tremor beneath his skin. You need to rest, she whispered. He smiled faintly. If I stop, the land stops. But that evening, he did stop. The sun dropped behind the ridge, red and heavy, and Elijah swayed, catching the porch rail before sinking to his knees. Naomi ran to him, the world narrowing to the rasp of his breathing. His skin burned under her touch. She got him to bed, his body shaking under the thin sheet. It's just the heat, he muttered, but his eyes rolled back. Naomi's fear tightened into something fierce and clear. She fetched cool water, wiped his chest, whispered his name over and over until the syllables became a prayer. The children watched from the doorway. He'll be all right, Naomi said, forcing the words out. She didn't know if she was speaking to them or herself. When the fever rose again that night, she rode out to the edge of town before dawn, dust biting her throat. The horizon shimmered with heat mirages, and every hoof-step of the mule sounded like thunder in dry air. She stopped at a small house near the chapel, Miss Evelyn's. The old woman opened the door before Naomi could knock. Her hair was white as sun-bleached cotton, her eyes sharp despite the years. You look like someone chasing a lost soul, she said. I need seeds, Naomi blurted. Anything that will grow in dust. Evelyn studied her for a long moment, then vanished inside. When she returned, she held a small linen pouch tied with faded string. Tomatoes, she said. These have outlived 3 generations and 2 wars. They'll grow if you believe they will. Naomi stared at it, confused. Why help me? Evelyn's gaze softened. Because once someone took my child away and told me I'd never grow life again. She pressed the pouch into Naomi's hand, fingers firm. Every mother leaves something that survives her. Don't forget that. Naomi swallowed hard. Thank you. Don't thank me, the woman said. Just make them live. By the time Naomi returned, the sky was burning white. She soaked the soil near the porch, dug small holes with her hands, ignoring the blisters. The earth was dry, cracking, but when she covered each seed, she hummed softly, an old tune her mother once sang while mending clothes. The children watched from the steps, silent. Days blurred. Elijah's fever came and went. Naomi tended both the plants and him, her life measured by spoonfuls of water and handfuls of dust. Every morning she checked the ground, and for a long time, nothing came. Then, one evening, as the light turned gold, she saw a small green stem pushing through the soil. Her breath caught. Look, she whispered. The children crowded around. The next day, there were 3 more. By the week's end, tiny yellow flowers appeared. Naomi watered them with what little they had left, her hands trembling with both exhaustion and awe. When the first tomato ripened, small, round, red as blood at sunrise, she picked it carefully, holding it like something sacred. Elijah, weak but upright, sat on the porch, eyes half-lidded. She sliced the tomato into 6 thin pieces, placed one on each plate. Isaiah wrinkled his nose. It's tiny. Naomi smiled. It's everything. They ate in silence. The flavor was tart, bright, alive. It tasted like rain they hadn't felt in months. Elijah looked at her then, voice a whisper. You saved the land. She shook her head. We saved each other. The wind shifted, cool for the first time in weeks. Naomi turned toward it, feeling the smallest drop of moisture brush her cheek. Just one, but enough. As the others went inside, Miss Evelyn's words echoed in her mind. Every mother leaves something that survives her. Naomi looked down at the pouch of seeds in her palm, dirt smudging its cloth. Her pulse beat slow and certain. I will, she murmured to the earth. I'll keep them alive. Behind her, thunder murmured faintly from the ridge, the promise of rain or change. The sky glowed copper, alive with heat and hope. The heat finally broke one morning in late August. Clouds gathered low over the ridge, heavy as iron, but no rain fell. Naomi stood by the porch rail, the air thick and strange, the garden breathing smoke instead of wind. She heard hooves before she saw him, that steady rhythm she used to know too well. Abel Hale rode into the yard like a ghost stepping back into its old house. His hat brim dripped sweat, and his coat hung loose around a smaller frame. Behind him, the dust rose and vanished into the gray light. Elijah's out by the barn, Naomi said, though she already knew Abel hadn't come for him. I came for you, he answered, dismounting slowly. His boots sank into the dry soil. I heard about the drought. Thought you might need help. Naomi crossed her arms, keeping the porch between them. You heard wrong. He smiled, faint, tired. You always were stubborn. His gaze moved over the porch, the door frame patched with cloth, the small tomato vines fighting to live. This place doesn't look like much. It's home, she said simply. Abel took off his hat, rubbed the dust from his brow. Mabel, my name's Naomi. He flinched at the firmness in her tone. For a long moment neither spoke. Then his voice softened, carrying the weight of years. I was wrong. About everything. I see you now, what you've made. And I have no sons. No peace. I thought maybe... Naomi stepped down from the porch. The earth cracked beneath her boots. You thought maybe you could trade regret for comfort. Abel's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes darted toward the house. You deserve more than this dust, Naomi. You could come back. We could... She cut him off with a quiet laugh. You threw me out because I couldn't give you life. But look around, Abel. There's more life here than you'll ever hold. From the doorway, Ruth peeked out, Isaiah limping behind her, Micah clutching the edge of Naomi's skirt. Elijah stood just beyond the barn, wiping his hands, watching but not stepping closer. His face was calm, unreadable, as if waiting for her choice. Abel followed her gaze. His voice faltered. They're not yours. They are, she said, steady. They call me Mama. Something in his expression cracked. You always were gentle. No, Naomi said. I stopped letting people tell me what gentleness means. The wind picked up, whirling dust between them. Abel set his hat back on his head, nodding once. I see that now. You can go, she said softly. You already took enough from me. There's nothing left to buy. He mounted his horse, hesitated once more. You look happy, he said, almost surprised. I am, she replied, because I have a home. Abel looked at her like he wanted to say more, then only tipped his hat. When he rode away, the dust swallowed him whole. Naomi stood watching until the sound faded. Then Elijah crossed the yard. His steps were slow but sure, his breath uneven. You didn't need me to step in, he said quietly. No, she answered, but I'm glad you were there. He nodded, eyes searching hers. You sure you're all right? She smiled, the kind that came from deep within. For the first time, yes. They stood side by side as thunder rolled over the hills. The smell of rain hung close, still teasing but near. The children laughed behind them, chasing each other across the yard. Naomi turned, watching Isaiah lift Ruth high into the air while Micah clapped. For a heartbeat, she saw herself reflected in the window glass. Not the woman sold in the square, but one remade by dust, by work, by love. The sky broke open then, not with rain yet, but with light. A single flash across the valley, white and wide. Elijah rested a hand on her shoulder. The land's changing, he said. She looked toward the garden, where the tomato vines trembled in the wind but didn't break. So are we. They went inside as the storm gathered. On the table, the pouch of seeds lay waiting, next to the half-carved sign Elijah had been shaping. She traced the letters with her fingertip, N-O, and smiled. That night, the wind rose harder, rattling the shutters, whispering of something still to come. Naomi closed the door against it and whispered back, We're not for sale. Outside, lightning flickered over the ridge, carving the silhouette of their home in gold for just an instant before the dark swallowed it again. By the time autumn rolled down the ridge, Cotton Ridge had changed its color. The fields, though still brittle, carried a new kind of green, thin, stubborn, shimmering when the wind moved through. Naomi woke before dawn every morning to the soft creak of the porch and the scent of wood smoke drifting in from the stove. The air no longer burned her lungs. It was still dry, but it held promise now. Elijah was already outside when she stepped onto the porch, leaning against the rail with his coffee. The horizon blushed pale gold, thin clouds streaked like brushstrokes. Feels different, he said. Naomi smiled faintly. The land's breathing again. They stood in silence side by side while the light spread over the fields. From the garden came the rustle of leaves and the faint thump of Micah chasing Ruth with a bucket half full of water. Isaiah followed behind, limping but determined, a makeshift crutch tucked under his arm. Naomi turned toward the sound, warmth swelling in her chest. This is what home sounds like, she thought. But peace in the West never stayed untouched. Later that day, a line of wagons arrived from town. 4 men in crisp coats and clean boots, maps rolled under their arms. The horses snorted, uneasy in the dry heat. One of the men, a tall one with polished spectacles, stepped forward. "Mr. Cole?" he called out. Elijah wiped his hands on a rag and met them halfway. "That's me." "Government Rail Commission," the man said. "We're charting a new line west of Cross Hollow. It'll cut straight across this property." Naomi froze where she stood. The words fell heavy, like iron dropped on wood. "We'll pay fair," the man continued. "Good money. Enough to move you closer to town, build proper walls. Your children could go to school in the valley. Think of what you could give them." Elijah said nothing at first. He looked past them, eyes sweeping over the land, the crooked fence, the garden that leaned toward the sun, the swing Naomi had hung from the oak tree, the grave of their old dog marked by a single stone. He turned his gaze to Naomi, who stood by the porch, her hands tightening around the rail. She shook her head once, slow, sure. Elijah faced the men again. "No," he said simply. The spokesman blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," Elijah repeated. "This land's not for sale." The man frowned. "You'll regret turning down the offer. The trains will come through anyway. Then they can bend around us." Something in Elijah's tone, calm, unyielding, made the man hesitate. "We'll give you time to reconsider," he muttered, rolling up his map. Dust rose behind their wheels as the wagons left the yard. When the sound faded, Naomi exhaled slowly. Elijah turned toward her. "You all right?" She nodded. She looked toward the garden. "I thought the world would stop trying to take things once we built something worth keeping." Elijah reached for her hand. "That's what makes it worth keeping." That night, they gathered on the porch. Naomi spread a thin blanket over the table while Elijah carved the final letters into the wooden sign he'd been shaping for days. The children watched, quiet and intent, as the knife scraped through the wood grain. When he finished, he set it upright by the porch light. The words were simple. Not for sale. Naomi brushed the sawdust from the letters with her fingertips. Then, almost shyly, Isaiah picked up the carving knife. "Can I add something?" Elijah raised a brow. "As long as it's true." The boy leaned close and carved 3 more words beneath his father's. "This is home." Naomi swallowed hard, her throat thick. "That's true," she said softly. They planted the sign at the end of the path the next morning. Boone Talbot, the trapper who once caused her fear, stopped by on his way into town. He stood there for a moment, reading the words, then set his whiskey bottle down at the fence post and walked away without a word. The story of the sign spread fast. By Sunday, half the town had heard about the coal place refusing the railroad. Some mocked it, said they were fools to turn down money. Others, quieter folks, nodded in secret understanding. That evening, Naomi stood at the small church, the wooden pews packed tighter than usual. The pastor offered her the floor after service. She hesitated only a breath before walking forward, the hem of her dress brushing the worn steps. "I don't have many words," she began, "but I've learned something in this land. that a place isn't made by what it's worth, but by what it holds. She looked over the crowd. You can't sell what's built by care or sweat or forgiveness. You can only live in it. The room was still. Then someone, Miss Evelyn, rose slowly, nodding. Others followed. By the time Naomi stepped down, people were signing a petition to reroute the tracks. When she came home, the porch light was still on. The children had fallen asleep near the fire. Elijah sat carving again, something smaller this time. He looked up when she entered. "You spoke for us?" She smiled. "For all of us." He nodded. "Good." From his hands, he lifted a small carving, a sparrow with open wings, and set it on the mantel. "It's yours," he said, "for staying." Naomi touched it gently, the smooth curve of the wood warm beneath her fingers. "Then I'll keep it flying." The next morning dawned bright and cool. Naomi walked with Isaiah to the schoolhouse. The path was lined with sunflowers, their tall heads nodding in the wind. The teacher, Mr. Doran, stood at the door with his ledger. "Morning," he greeted. "We're finishing enrollment today. Just need the family names for the records." Isaiah straightened, proud in his patched shirt. "Thomas Isaiah Cole," he said. "And your mother?" Naomi felt her heart catch. The pause stretched, filled with the sound of the wind through the eaves. Then Isaiah's voice came clear and sure. "Naomi Cole." The teacher blinked, then smiled. "That's a fine name." He wrote it down without question. Naomi stood very still. For a heartbeat, everything around her blurred. The children laughing, the bell ringing, the smell of chalk and hay. That one name, written in clean ink, seemed to fill the world. When they walked home, Elijah was waiting by the gate. "He do all right?" Naomi nodded, unable to speak at first. "He gave me a name," she finally whispered. Elijah smiled, slow and quiet. "Reckon you earned it." That evening, as the sky deepened to violet, Naomi hung her green scarf, the one she'd carried from the day of her sale, on the nail above the door. It fluttered gently in the breeze, catching the last gold light. Elijah came to stand beside her. "If you stay," he said, his voice low, steady, "I'll choose you again tomorrow, and every morning after." Naomi turned toward him, eyes soft, full. "I've been home since the day you didn't ask me to leave." They stood in the doorway, framed by light and dust and the quiet rhythm of the evening. Behind them, the children's laughter spilled through the windows. Outside, the sign at the end of the road caught the setting, sun. The words glowed faintly, "Not for sale." The wind brushed across it, making a soft sound like a sigh, like the land itself agreeing. Naomi glanced back once more at the scarf, then at Elijah. "We're not just staying," she said. "We're growing." He smiled, and together they stepped inside, the door closing gently behind them. That night, the hills slept under a thin mist, and the garden breathed out the scent of ripe tomatoes and wet soil. The stars came out slowly, quiet and bright. If someone had passed the old fence then, they would have seen the lantern glowing on the porch, steady against the dark. A small, unshakable light saying, "Here, love chose to stay." Out here on the quiet hills of Cotton Ridge, love didn't come like thunder. It grew slow like roots beneath the dust. Naomi and Elijah showed us that belonging isn't bought or begged for. It's built, one act of kindness at a time. Maybe their garden, their laughter, and that little wooden sign remind us of what truly lasts. Not the land we own, but the hearts we tend. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a hope, or a love that still lingers, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell us what part stayed with you the most. Did Naomi's courage remind you of someone you've known? Did Elijah's quiet care feel familiar, like an old friend? We invite you to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you'll never miss another tale from Western Tales. Stories of love, resilience, and second chances beneath the wide American sky. Thank you for spending this time with us. Stay a while longer if you wish. The porch light's still on, the night wind's soft, and there's always another story waiting to be told.